Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stanley Dash. I'm from the Client Training and Education Department at TradeStation. And our topic this afternoon is an analysis technique in TradeStation known as ActivityBars. ActivityBars are unique in TradeStation in that they allow us to examine the price action within the construct of our normal bar interval. We'll go through some of the built-in activity bars today and talk about the input settings and the display to get a better handle on just what information is coming out. You're looking at a sample in front of you right now of an activity bar. Actually, before I start, I apologize, before I get into the activity bars, let me mention quickly for those of you who have not joined us before for our online presentations, that in the upper part of the viewing window, there is a link to frequently asked questions. If you do have a problem viewing or hearing, you might want to check those FAQs. In addition, to refresh your player, if you lose the picture or the sound and you think you need to refresh the player, you can try F5, the F5 key on your keyboard. And finally, you'll notice at the bottom of the player, there's a place for you to submit questions. Please keep those questions text-wise to the rough size of that box that you have there so I can see them. And I'll do my best to answer some of those questions, at least as we go along through the presentation. Whatever questions I can't answer or don't get to during the presentation, I'll do my best to follow up with by email over the next few days, so be a little patient with me, please. As I said, before I dig into the activity bars, I was remiss in not mentioning those FAQs and the question section at the bottom of the player, so thank you for giving me a minute to back up. I began by saying that activity bars are an analysis technique in TradeStation that allow us to examine detailed information within our normal bar interval. I also mentioned we'll take a look at the built-in analysis techniques, some of the inputs, get an idea of what information is available and what it looks like. Right now, you're looking at one of the activity bar studies. We'll talk about it in more detail in a minute. But I want to put in perspective this idea of our bar interval and our activity bar data interval. Right now, the chart that you're looking at is based on a conventional 30-minute chart. It happens to be Cisco, but we're just using that as a sample here. So each grouping, and I'll use the pointer here, maybe I can make that easier. Each of these bars is a 30-minute interval, just as we'd create any 30-minute bar chart. The activity bar data is based on 5-minute intervals within the 30-minute bar. In order to keep our lingo somewhat organized, we'll be talking about bar intervals, and I'll try and use the right words, bar intervals as conventional bar intervals, the same way we would in any chart. And I'll also be talking about activity bar data, or activity bar intervals, and that's what you see, in this case, to the right of the bar, that's the activity bar data. 30-minute bar interval in this chart, and a 5-minute activity bar interval. Again, we're going to get into more detail as we go along. The idea in this case, and if you can keep this in perspective, I think it makes activity bars easier to understand, is that we will examine each 5-minute bar within the 30-minute bar. 30-minute bar is still our interval, but in this case, 5-minute is the activity bar data interval. Of course, we can adjust all that, and we'll take a look at the settings in just a moment. At TradeStation, we refer to this as look-inside bar technology. In other words, inside our 30-minute bar, we can even examine down to the 1-minute level. And for most of this presentation, I used a 30-minute and a 5-minute because it gave us something we could grasp onto and see. In fact, if you're looking at the chart in front of you, you'll notice that there should be For each 30-minute bar, there should be 6 color or letter segments, A, B, C through F, and each of those segments represents a 5-minute bar within the content of the 30-minute interval. Now there are 5 built-in, let me change charts here for a moment, just bear with me. Here's a conventional 30-minute and 5-minute actually. If you take a look at this chart, here's what I was trying to get across about one bar inside another. Each of the brown bars is a 30-minute bar, which represents the 5-minute bars before it and then the one on top of it. So this bar, this brown one, is the sum, if you will, of these 6 5-minute bars. Here with the market live, and this broadcast is on a short delay, so this live market is probably 15 to 30 seconds behind what you might be seeing if you're looking at live TradeStation. This is the current 30-minute bar, which is the sum of these 2 5-minute bars so far. I've got 1:08 p.m. As I say, we've got a small stagger in the broadcast. Now there are 5 built-in activity bars, and we'll take a walk through. We should have time to walk through all of these at least, so we get a sense of what they're doing. And as I said, keep in mind that we're examining data within our broad bar interval. And again, I'm choosing 30 minutes because it's something we can work with for educational purposes, and you can certainly change that, and we'll see how. So there are 5 built-in activity bar studies, and the first one we'll take a look at is price distribution. The first one we'll take a look at is price distribution. Now, I already have that displayed. I will back up so that we'll see the dialog box, but price distribution is the one we've been looking at. And the way I have this set right now is to take the 30-minute bar and divide it up into 5-minute intervals. Each letter group represents an interval. So for instance, I can see that the first 5 minutes of this bar created a bar thus. And the next 5 minutes, this was the price range, C. The next 5 minutes, this was the price range, C. And then D was the 4th 5-minute bar within the 30. E was the 5th, and F was the 6th. The opening price of the bar, instead of the traditional hash mark in a conventional bar chart, we put an arrow to the left, so it's a little more distinct than the conventional hash mark. And for the closing, we put a little arrow to the right instead of the conventional hash mark. By coincidence, this looks like a double-headed arrow because the next bar opened at the same price. But you can see that otherwise the closing arrow is a single arrow pointing to the closing price of the bar. And remember, those are the open and closing prices of the bar based on that 30-minute interval. Each of the letter groups is the range of the 5-minute bar within the 30-minute interval. The green rectangle extending to the right of the conventional bar, the green rectangle extending to the right of the conventional bar, represents what we call an activity zone. The activity zone by default, and then I'm going to back up and go through the settings. The activity zone by default is 1 standard deviation above and below the mode price. The mode price being the most frequent price traded. TradeStation takes that mode price, calculates 1 standard deviation above and below it, based on the distribution of prices, and then creates that activity zone. Now, in looking at this price distribution, what we can see is both a sequence of time, a sequence of the 5-minute bars within the 30, We can also see those prices that were touched most frequently within the 30-minute bar. In other words, we can see which price zones, which price areas, let me not confuse the words, which price areas, which price levels were touched most frequently by each of the 5-minute bars within the 30. Again, you can do this down to the 1-minute level, and I did it to a 5 so that we can get a handle on the A through F boxes. Now let's take a look at the formatting dialog. Let me adjust it here so you can see it a little bit. Let's take a look at the formatting dialog because I want you to get an idea of what these settings are. Again, I put this on before we logged in, before we started the presentation. First, I'm starting, admittedly, with the last tab in the Format dialog, which is called Data Settings. And here's where I've chosen to use a 5-minute interval. Remember, when I create my chart, I created it as a conventional 30 minutes. Then I inserted the activity bar called Price Distribution, and I've decided that within the 30-minute bar, I want to divide it up into 5-minute segments. And that's on the Data Settings tab. On the Style tab, we have some on-off checkboxes for various parts of the style display. Now, I'll point to them back here in the chart, but you'll also see them, of course, in the preview window. For instance, if I choose not to see the cell outlines, but only the cell symbols, if we unclick Display Cell, you can see in the preview window we only see the symbols. Down in the preview, we're just using keyboard characters. In the chart, we generally use alphas. So it would remove, we'd see the letters, but would remove the outlines. If I leave Display Cell, remove symbols, then it will just display a color block. Display Activity Zone means that where it's relevant, not every one of the Activity Bar studies displays this zone, but here in Price Distribution, we have an activity zone, which, as I said, by default, 1 standard deviation above and below the mode. We can remove that if we like. And we can also remove the open and close markers. Those were the arrows just to the left and just to the right, indicating the open and the close of the conventional bar interval, in this case 30 minutes. And I'll change this a little bit just so you get an idea of what it looks like. We'll leave the symbols but remove the cells. And again, this is a question of how your eye catches the chart and catches the distribution of prices and what other information you might have in here. I'll go back to Format, and I'll leave the cells, but I'll remove the symbols. I won't do this for every study, but I'm just trying to, these settings are on each of the activity bar studies, and you can work with these to get a sense of what it feels like, and again, what fits your eye best. We can remove the activity zone. I'll leave the open and close markers. But in this case, I've removed that green rectangle to the right of the conventional bar. So now I'm seeing, again, the price distribution of each 5-minute bar within the 30 minutes. And I'll bring that back. Let's take a look at the Inputs tab, which is of the 3 tabs, of the 5 tabs, excuse me, these are the 3 we're mostly concerned with: Inputs, Style, and Data Settings. The Inputs tab has a first input is called Approximate Number of Rows, and the default number is 10. What it does is it lays out a number of rows that will go, a number of rows for the cells. If you find that you're losing precision, you might be looking at this on a much bigger scale, or perhaps more accurate to say a smaller scale. You might want to increase that approximate number of rows. For most of what I do in this demonstration here, I'm leaving it at 10. And probably to start off with, leave it at 10 and see if the precision of the cells is fitting what your expectation is. Cycle colors true will use the color cycle as you see in the chart each of the different letters is cycling to a new color. If you set cycle colors to false, then it will use whatever color is in that third input, in this case dark green. So if you'd like all the cells to be the same color, set cycle colors to false and either leave dark green or whatever color you want to see in here. Now, one word of note, in the interest of appropriate disclosure, if you're using 8.1, the A cells, the letter A cells, are coming up in black. So if you look at an activity bar with cycle colors true and you don't see A cells, it's because there is a color conflict with the A cells. Now that's in 8.1, but it's addressed in Service Pack 1, which is what you're looking at here. So if you are looking at 8.1, if you put an activity bar study in and the A cells don't appear, then I would go back to this Inputs tab, change cycle colors to false, and put in a default color, or leave the dark green, or put in yellow or white, something that'll stand out against your background. But I don't want you to think there's any problem with your settings per se. Okay. The mode type determines, is a tiebreaker if there's more than one price row that fits the mode. In other words, mode type -1 means take the lower mode price. Let me just click OK and back out to the chart again for a minute. For instance, here we have two price rows that have the same number of cells. So we have the mode is even at these two price levels. So for the purpose of determining the modal price and then one standard deviation above and below, the default setting for mode type is -1, means we'll use the lower price level if there's a tie. You can change that to +1 if you'd rather use the higher price. Zone number devs is the number of standard deviations above and below the mode price for creating this activity zone. So recapping, the activity zone is going to be based on the lowest mode price if there's a tie, and it'll be one standard deviation above and below that mode price. Color cycle true. This default color is only in effect if you set the cycle colors to false. Okay, quick recap before we move on to the next activity bar study. Right now, what we're looking at is each letter represents a 5-minute bar within the 30-minute. A through F in chronological sequence. And this lets us know what price areas were touched by the most number, in the most number of those 5-minute bars, during the most number of those 5-minute bars. So for example, just picking this is the first 30-minute bar of the day. You can see my session break. We can see that here in this price area was touched in 5 of the 5-minute segments. Here we see areas touched in 5 of the 5-minute segments. We also know in this bar, although there's something of a wide distribution and the modal price only was touched in 4 of the segments, we also see that the bar's first 5 minutes was down here, and that as the bar progressed, we were at higher levels. This is the first 5-minute bar, the next 5-minute bar, C is the third, D, E, and F, until the bar finally closed up in this area. So we know that the progression during this 30-minute bar was for generally higher prices if we follow the sequence of letters. So this is the activity bar known as price distribution. Now let's go on to the next, which is known as volume distribution. Now I set some of these up ahead of time, so it would be a little easier for us to see. But I will go through the dialog boxes. There was a question about creating a chart like this. I believe a question like that came from Don. Create a conventional 30-minute chart. Well, I'm creating a 30-minute, obviously any time-based interval. And then insert activity bar. And you'll get the list of activity bars, those 5 that are built in. Obviously, activity bars are written in easy language. You can create your own. You can customize these. But for this demonstration, I haven't written any particular easy language, and we're using the default built-in pieces. The price distribution, I'm sorry, this is the volume distribution activity bar. Now, the volume distribution activity bar, I'm going to go right into the formatting dialog, just so we know what we're looking at. This is still a 30-minute default, a 30-minute conventional bar interval. I used Cisco as the demonstration, but a 30-minute conventional interval, so in that sense it's the same as the prior chart. 5-minute activity bar interval, or activity bar data interval. So that's the same also as the prior one. Now in the Inputs tab, we have some different inputs. Again, we have approximate number of rows. That'll just distribute the data. And for most of what you're doing, 10 might be fine. And if you find the data is not precise enough, you need greater precision, you may want to increase that. You'll see cycle colors and default color, and I'm using the cycle colors. But here we have something called block size. Now remember, this particular activity bar is called volume distribution. I set the block size to 250,000. Now I did that intentionally. That's a pretty high number. I think it's a pretty high number, but we're looking at Cisco, so it's actively traded. And I think the important thing here is that, again, I wanted to be able to see and test data and yet not overwhelm what we're looking at. Block size of 250,000. What does that mean? Well, only the activity bar data, 5-minute in this case, with a volume greater than or equal to my block size will show. What does that mean? That means if any of the 5-minute activity bars within the 30-minute have a volume of less than 250, they're not included. If they have a volume equal to or greater than 250, then they are included in the activity bar display. Now, I'm going to remember that 250. I'm going to go back to the chart for a minute so we can take a look. Now, at first blush, this may look kind of similar to the other chart, the price distribution. Here we have A, B. In fact, stay with me one second. Let me push these apart a little bit so we can see them better. I can try and line them up similarly to the one we had before. Yeah, here's the first one this morning. We saw that on the other chart as well. Stay with me a second. So here you'll see we have A, B, C, D, E, and F. If the activity bar has at least that threshold of volume, 250,000 in this case, then the activity bar is displayed, the letters are displayed with the range of that activity bar interval. So in other words, as long as that A bar, which is the first 5-minute in the 30, has at least 250,000 of volume, that was my choice, then it's displayed just as it would be on the price distribution activity bar. B, C, D, E, and F. However, if one of those intervals has less than 250,000, then it's not displayed at all. On this activity bar data, you'll see here's our 30-minute conventional bar. Here's A. Here's B. No C and D. Because C and D did not have enough volume to qualify. Once the bar qualifies, once the activity data, be careful with the words, once the activity data qualifies, then the entire price range of that activity data is displayed in the form of the cell. If the activity data does not qualify, then it's skipped over. A, B, E, and F appear only. Here we have only B, D, and F. Now the presumption here, and again, I put in 250,000 shares so we could see a picture we could grasp. You consider the analytical implications, please. What we're saying here is that any of the activity bars that don't qualify as to a certain volume, I'm not going to count those in when I look at the distribution of price. So while this activity bar is called volume distribution, I'm seeing a distribution of price as qualified by volume. Here we see the current bar is underway, and I have A and B cells as the current bar is underway. Okay, I'm going to let that sink in for a minute and repeat this, and I'm going to go on. I'm also going to mention something for those of you who are going to look at this more closely. One of the things you might do is create a companion chart to go with this to examine it more closely. And that's one of the reasons I use something like 30-minute and 5-minute, because I'm trying to get a grasp on the data and display it a certain way. You might look at, for instance, at a 5-minute bar chart. Do I have one in here? Not currently. At a 5-minute bar chart with the volume displayed. And then as you work, in fact, I'll set one up so you can see how to do that in a couple of minutes. As you look at the 5-minute bars, within the 30s, you'll see, well, did that qualify? No, it didn't qualify. Well, that's why there are no cells. But I want you to recognize that in the volume distribution activity bar, the cells are displayed, the cells don't display the volume. I'm trying to drag my chart here a little bit. The cells don't display the volume. The cells represent the price range of the activity bar if it qualified for my volume threshold. My volume threshold was 250,000. In fact, let me take another minute right now. I will create a 5-minute Cisco. And one second, let me just insert a conventional indicator for volume so we can get some perspective. And let me show you one other item. I'm going to minimize the chart. Okay, good, perfect. What you might want to take a look at, using, let me float my toolbar for a minute. You might want to take a look, if you're going to examine this more closely, at using the different tracking pointer. Instead of the conventional pointer, try the workspace tracking pointer. If you've never used it before, it's very convenient. It'll mark it'll mark the same location in terms of the x-axis for each of the in each of the charts in a workspace. Now remember, I'm on a 5-minute bar right here on the right in the chart where my pointer is, and this is a 30-minute bar. So let me back up a little bit. I'm going to step forward just a little bit. Okay, now if you look at my bar, 5 bar time, which would be the first bar of a half hour of a 30-minute bar, 35 times. And as I step the pointer, 1 bar at a time, it doesn't change here because I'm still within this same 30-minute construct. Eventually, when I get to the next 30-minute construct, the next 30-minute bar, now my vertical moves over here as well. Now we saw in this, again, we're in the 12:35 bar, so that's the first bar of this half-hour segment. So A, B, and C, the first 3 5-minute bars, should have volume greater than 250,000. And I'm going to keep my pointer over here in the right side chart, and if you look at my data tip, the volume is about 282. The next one, it's about 285, so B qualified. Now I'm up to C, it's 257. C qualified. The volume in D was only 51,000 shares, did not make my threshold, and there are no D cells. E, whoops, I'm sorry, a little bit quick. E is about 143,000, did not qualify. There are no E cells, and that's the 12:55 bar. And one more, here's the last 5-minute bar within that 30. The volume 68,000, did not qualify. So once the 5-minute bar had that threshold of volume, then its price range was displayed in the form of the activity bar cells. D, E, and F did not qualify, and so they were not displayed here at all. Again, look at creating the chart to match the activity bar interval, and then using the tracking pointer set to workspace is a very good way to compare and check your settings. Okay, let me return my toolbar, and let's sort of move on from this activity bar study. Okay, now this one was called this activity bar study was called a volume distribution, and again, it's actually displaying for us the price, but with a volume qualifier. And I'm trying to show you these in an order that hopefully builds a little bit. This is price distribution. The one titled volume distribution is also price distribution, but with a volume qualifier. In fact, here's our first bar of this morning, 8:23. And here it is, first bar this morning, 8:23. It looks just the same. Since each of the bars qualified with 250,000 shares or more volume, it looks exactly the same. But price distribution is exactly that. Volume distribution is the prices displayed with a volume qualifier. Okay, let's move on to the next, which is volume strength. Now, a brief description of volume strength is that each one of the 5-minute intervals, and if you take a look at what's in front of you, I won't start clicking yet, you'll see generally there are 6 groups of cells, A through F, see the colors, except in some cases you'll see, for instance, if you're looking at the first bar of this morning, 8:23, which is a good example, in some cases they're triple wide. In the case of E, it's only double wide. So why would there be 3 cells now for A? The distribution looks the same as what we've looked at before, but it's 3 wide for A, double wide for E. Where's another example? Let's see, double wide here for A and B and C and D, and triple wide for E and F. Same distribution, but we're adding extra cells in terms of width. The volume strength activity bar puts 1 cell of width for each multiple of the block size. In other words, as long if the A activity bar interval, in other words, my first 5-minute bar within the 30, has at least my block size of volume, then the price range will be displayed single wide. If it does not have my block size of volume, it won't be displayed at all. If it has multiples of my block size, it will be multiple wide. Let's take a look at the formatting. Again, in this case, I'm using a 30-minute with a 5-minute interval. Try to do that so that these are consistent and we can see the variation. On the Inputs tab, few inputs, approximate number of rows. Again, that's usually adequate, but if you find that you're losing precision depending on the size of your bars, you might want to make that greater. The colors, cycle colors, and default color we talked about, and I'll recap that again later. Now, in this case, I set the block size to 200,000. I set the block size to 200,000. And I also set the max weight to 3. So these are the 2 relevant inputs that we need to mention. These 2 inputs say that I want to display the activity bar cells for each one of my activity bar units, 5-minute in this case. I want to display the cells that represent the price range, as long as that activity bar had at least 200,000 shares. If the block size, if the bar had less than 200,000, leave it out. If it had more than 200,000, then I want to put 1 cell wide for each 200,000. So the wide, up to a maximum of 3 cells wide. You can make that much greater than 3, and I made it 3 again so we get a nice visual and can dig into it. So, what does this tell me? Remember, my block size is 200,000, maximum weight 3. That's what I said in this study. Which means that I know that the first activity bar interval here, A, the first 5 minutes of the 30, had at least 600,000 shares traded and less than 800. Well, I shouldn't say less than 800. I apologize. If I had set my max weight to greater than 3, then I know that each letter wide, each cell wide is 200,000 shares. I maxed it at 3. So I know that this had at least 600,000 shares. B had at least 600,000 shares. So did C and D. E has only 2 cells wide. So I know that the volume on the E activity bar, the fifth 5-minute bar within the 30, had at least 400,000 shares, but less than 600. I can say that in this case because the max weight is 3. Now, I'm going to move out to the right just a little bit. Take a look at this bar and activity bar data. Here's the A, just 1 cell wide, which means it had 200,000 shares at least, but less than 400. B is double wide. C is single. D is single. E is single. F is double. So now when I look at the distributions of price are enhanced, perhaps, are emphasized by the volume that was covered at those price levels. So not only did a particular price level trade in 5 of the segments, but the fact that there may have been more volume that ran through that price level is emphasized by adding width to the activity bar study. This is known as volume strength. I want to go back for a moment to the formatting dialog. The key inputs here are block size and max weight. Block size is if each of any activity bar, meaning the 5-minute within the 30 in my case, any activity bar that has less than 200 is ignored. Anyone that has greater 200, the price range is displayed in the cells, and for each 200,000 shares of volume, it's made wider by 1 cell. In this case, up to a maximum of 3. These are not the defaults. I changed these for the demonstration. The defaults are actually, the default block size is 100, which is a little bit silly for a 5-minute system. Just to emphasize again, if we take a look at this bar out, one of these bars here, you'll see there's no A or C. Let me make this bigger. I don't want to make you dizzy, but look at this. Here, it's a little easy to see. There is no A or C. There are no A or C cells in here. So the first 5-minute bar had less than 200,000 shares. B had at least 200, but less than 4. D had 4, but less than 6. D is double wide. E qualified with at least 200, but less than 4. And F had at least 200, but less than 4. So, recapping, the activity bar cells, again, are showing us price range, but only if the bar qualified as to a minimum volume, that's my block size, and for every multiple of the block size, up to max weight, up to 3 in this case, I'm adding an extra cell of width. So I'm seeing a distribution of price within the bar enhanced, let's say, by how much volume occurred on each of those activity bars within my 30-minute interval. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do it in this order is I think it becomes easy to absorb that way. Price distribution is exactly that, a straight price distribution, no volume element, and I can see each of my activity bar intervals within my broad interval. Volume distribution is also showing me the price distribution, the price range of each of my activity bars, but only if that activity bar interval qualified as to a minimum price threshold. So I'm saying if there was not enough activity within that 5-minute unit, don't even show me the price display. Then even further, volume strength is saying, well, if I don't have enough volume to qualify, don't show me the activity bars at all. But now, show me price for activity bars. Without enough volume, disregard it. And if there is enough volume, enhance it by making it wider based on how big the volume was. Now, the next one we'll take a look at is something called up versus down strength. Up versus down strength. Let me resize here a minute. I just had a conventional 5-minute behind it. We might want to reference that. Meanwhile, let's just take a look at this. Brief description of up versus down strength is that each of the letters, let me push this a little bit so you can see them. Each of the letters represents, remember, I'm still on a 30-minute with a 5-minute data, activity bar data. I'm staying with that so we can focus on it. Each of the letters represents one of the 6 5-minute activity bars within my 30 minutes. For every one of those segments that closed higher than the bar before, I get a letter in light blue by default, I'll show you the settings, on the right side of the bar. For every one of those segments that closed lower than the bar before, I get a letter in red on the left side. In addition, each of these had to have a volume greater than or equal to a certain setting, a block size setting, similar to the input we saw previously. What is this telling us? It's comparing each of the activity bar intervals to the one before. So when I say if the bar closed higher, then we get a letter on the right side, I mean if the 5-minute bar closed higher than the 5-minute bar before it. So each of these is comparing the activity bar interval to the prior activity bar interval. And in order for it to qualify, it has to have changed, it has to have had a volume greater than or equal to my block size. Let me flip it a little bit. If the bar, activity bar is unchanged from the one before, there's no marker, no cell. If the volume is less than the block size, there's no cell, regardless of the change. So here we know the A activity bar interval, the first 5-minute of the 30, closed lower than the 5-minute bar before, and had at least volume of my block size. I'll check to see. We'll check and see what I put in here. I think I put in 250,000. The B segment closed higher and had at least that much volume. C and D were either unchanged or did not qualify as to volume. E closed higher and qualified as to volume. F was either unchanged from the 5-minute bar before or did not qualify as to volume. The location of the letter is where that 5-minute bar closed. So I'm also able to track what were the closing prices of the 5-minute bars within the 30. Let's take a look at the formatting dialog to straighten out some of the detail. Approximate number of rows we discussed. You may need to increase that when you start to look at more minute, let's say, data. Block size I set here to 200,000, not 250. Sorry, but I said it's 200. Maximum weight I said was 1. So I said if there's 200,000 shares traded, put 1 marker for the sell. If we increase this, let's say, to 3, analogous to the prior activity bar, then we'll see 1 sell for each 200,000 shares in volume up to a maximum of 3. And then there are inputs for the color settings, cyan and red, and of course you can see. So let's just change this max weight to 3 and click OK. Okay, now we see that this A cell closed lower than the 5 minutes before. This A activity bar interval closed lower than the 5 minute one before. And we know it had a volume of at least 400,000 but less than 600,000 shares. Same thing for B. B closed higher at least 400,000, less than 600,000 shares. And E closed higher, and we know it had at least 600,000 shares, and maybe more, but we maxed it at 3 just to keep the picture under control. So now we can tap where were the closes. In fact, let's go back to the formatting. Let's make it something really simple. Let's just make the maximum weight 1, and let's make the block size something really small, like 100. Which means that every bar will qualify as the volume. Every 5-minute bar in Cisco is going to have at least 100 shares. But we're going to restrict it to one cell. And essentially, by doing that, I'm taking volume out of the picture by making it 100. And I can see what was the distribution of the closing prices of the 5-minute bars within each 30. Now here I see no A, which means A was unchanged. Again, we made the volume so low at 100 that every 5-minute bar is going to qualify. So A must have been unchanged, and then B closed lower than A, C, D was up, E and F were down here, and of course the 30-minute bar had to close where F was. So at its simplest, essentially removing the volume, we're saying, okay, what was the distribution of the closing prices within of the 5-minute bars within each 30? In this case, no letter, unchanged. Now, if we go back to formatting this, we might make this change again, and let's say, let's go back to making this 200, and I'll make it, we can even make it 5 in this case. And we're saying, well, I still want to see the distribution, but only if there was at least 200,000 shares traded. If there's not, then that closing price of the 5-minute bar is not that important to me. And I want to see this weighted according to how big the volume was on each bar. So I see a number of the 5-minute bars closed here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again. Try not to make you dizzy, but I want you to be able to see the letters. We see a number, we see again, E, B, C, E, F, all closed down here, and we see the distribution of volume, or a sense of the volume, based on that. Here we see E closed up here, and there's quite a bit of volume. In this case, because we boosted the max weight to 5, I know that at least 1 million shares traded on that E bar. Now the last of these we'll look at, and then I'll recap for just a minute. I'll take 1 or 2 questions if there are any more that begin to come up. The last one is known as candlestick volume accumulation. This one's a little bit different than the others. We don't really rely on the cells so much. But it's kind of interesting. Candlestick volume accumulation creates what I'll call a mock candlestick. This is a conventional bar with the activity bar on it. And you can convert the chart itself to a candlestick. I don't know if it really enhances the visual a lot. You can try that and see what it would look like. In fact, I'll click it over to a candlestick. And I don't know if I actually gain or lose some clarity with that. So I'm going to return to the conventional bar just so we see which part of this graphic is is generated by the activity bar. Here's what happens. The activity bar does 2 things. It creates what looks like the activity zones. Remember with price distribution, we saw the activity zone? Well, it uses the same graphic drawing tool for the activity zone. It uses it in a different way. It uses it to draw the real body. So that is not a distribution above and below modal price. That's just a graphic representation of the real body. Then there's a red or cyan line, and those are the default colors, just to let you know whether it was a bullish candle or a bearish candle. The key in the activity bar portion here is you'll notice that some of these zones are much wider than others. And the width is based on volume. The width is based on the volume. Sorry, let's format this, and we'll take a look at the setting. Again, I'm looking at a 30-minute with a 5-minute interval. And in this case, I have block size set to 100,000. I have max number of cells 100, which means the most I will do is set a width. Remember, the width of the candle, the virtual candle, is a certain number of cells. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to go to max of 100. And yeah, obviously you can change that if you need more room. Up color cyan, down color red. That just represents, of course, the bullish or bearish candle line that you see. So what we're saying in here is that for every 100,000 shares in volume, the candle will be 1 cell wide. So I know on a greater volume candle, I'm getting a much wider real body. I know that this occurred on relatively low volume compared to a candle like this. Now, we can actually go a step further here. We can insert the volume indicator. Just insert the conventional volume indicator. And I'm going to open up the data window. It brings up a couple of interesting things. When I open up the data window, first of all, you'll see some activity bar information in here. And we didn't open this up for the other studies, but you will get similar information. You'll get information on what study is in here and what the activity bar interval is. You'll see information to the left and information to the right, because sometimes, remember, in some of these we display information to the left and right of the bar, in some cases only to the right of the bar. So we do have left and right information separately. Number of cells, cell count, value area, high and low. You'll take a look more closely at the data window and you'll see what's displayed. On a bar like this, and I'm just picking one at random, you'll notice that the volume is over 40 million. I'm sorry, over 4 million. Well, if I want 1 cell for every 100,000 shares, I should have 40 cells, and that's exactly how wide that candle is, 40 cells. I'll pick another one. Let's pick that one from this morning that's quite wide because it was high volume on the opening this morning. And we see that the volume is some almost 7 million. So 6.9 million, well, that's going to give me 69 cells wide. So this is 69 cells represented. So I'm getting a representation of the volume in the width of that real body. Now, one or two notes for you, especially those of you who are interested in the easy language. I haven't done any custom work for this, so everything you see here is built in, and of course you can work with the easy language. But one quick footnote for those of you curious, the real body is created using this activity zone feature of the activity bars. And these vertical blue and red lines are actually done using trend line commands. And I say that in particular to of course, to those of you using easy language and those veterans of our easy language classes. Kind of a novel use of the trend line command is in order to create that mock real body, red or cyan, inside the activity bar. Okay, let me recap just a couple of things. Let me recap just a few things. First of all, we were talking about this idea of look-inside bar technology. Many of you are familiar with our back testing, but it was specifically what we're saying here is within the interval of my conventional bar, I've been using 30 minutes, I can break down the data, and I can look at various ways of, I can view several ways of seeing the price data qualified by volume or seeing the volume data. Using ActivityBars. A few things about ActivityBars in terms of the platform. You can only have one ActivityBar study in a chart at a time. So if I have price distribution, which is what you're looking at again here, if I put in another ActivityBar study, this one will automatically be removed. But as you can see, there's no restriction on having multiple charts with the same symbol and having various ActivityBar studies in them. Second, the ActivityBar study will update only at the close of an ActivityBar interval. In other words, right now I've got 2 minutes before the hour in my 30 minutes. This is the price distribution, no volume qualifier. So you'll see A, B, C, D, and E. So the last 5-minute segment is going to be F. Although this indicator is updating, you'll see it ticking around. It won't complete until the F segment is complete. So when this last ActivityBar interval, 5 minutes, is complete, all the F cells will appear. It'll probably happen while I'm talking, so I'll leave it set right this way. But the ActivityBar data posts only when at the close of each of the individual ActivityBar intervals. I'll leave this so you see that happen in a minute. One other point I want to make is that we took a look, for instance, at volume distribution and other volume-related items, volume distribution, volume strength. I want to like to see the F's appear, but then I do want to show you a formatting setting, so I want to wait just 1 minute and talk about volume and fix. Watch bar never closes. Okay, so now as soon as we hit that 2 o'clock, and again, I'm probably about 15 or 30 seconds behind broadcast reason. As soon as we hit that, now my F's appeared. Now the new 30-minute bar is building. You won't see any A's until 5 minutes past the hour. The other thing I was going to mention is that when we create a chart, any intraday chart, most of you know that when you create an intraday chart, you can choose whether to have trade volume in the volume field or tick count in the volume field. So the things we've discussed here using volume, like volume distribution and volume strength, could also be used with tick count just by changing the formatting symbol setting from trade volume to tick count. So instead of using the volume as a qualifier for price, maybe I want to use the tick count as a qualifier for price. The activity bar will work just fine. I just have to change the symbol settings and push tick count into the volume field instead of trade volume. The last thing I wanted to remind you is that in 8.1 pre-service pack 1, you probably have the current version of that, which is the build we just issued last week, I believe it was. The activity bar, the A cells, if you leave the color cycling to the default, which is cycle colors true, the A cells is a color conflict. We've addressed it in Service Pack 1. So if you're in 8.1, a quick fix without getting involved in any easy language, a quick fix is to make cycle colors false, and then just either leave the dark green default color, you'll see all the cells green, or change it to some other color. You won't get this full distinction of colors by doing that, but you will be able to see all the cells. And again, it's addressed in Service Pack 1, which is what you're looking at here in this broadcast. When we look at activity bars, our goal in creating them was to give you the opportunity to see greater distinction, greater clarity for the action within a bar. Can I take my conventional bar interval, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's something else. Can I take that conventional interval that I use, and by the way, even though there are activity bars here, and I said you could only put in one activity bar study, you can put other studies in here. You can put indicators and show me's into here. Can I take and use an activity bar study to respect my conventional and analytical interval, whether it's 30-minute or 13-minute or 65-minute or 3-minute, and break down the data and, in fact, add another dimension? Technical analysts talk a lot about time and price, and those are the axes of our chart. But can I add a third dimension, usually refer to ticks and volume as a possible third dimension, and yet respect and maintain my analytical interval? Price distribution is a straight distribution of the prices within my bar according to my activity bar interval. Volume distribution lets me say only display. This also plots the range of prices in each activity bar interval, but only when they qualify as to my volume threshold. Volume strength also displays the prices of my activity bar intervals, only when they qualify for my volume threshold. And then if they are multiples of my volume threshold, makes that group of cells wide by the multiple of the volume. Up versus down strength lets me see each of the activity bar segments, whether it closes higher or lower than the one before, and add a volume qualifier. And the candlestick volume accumulation lets me see a real body whose width is adjusted based on the volume of that bar. I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to archive this. It'll take us just a little time to convert the files and post them to an archive. So you're welcome to come up and to log on and see that. If any of your colleagues want to see this presentation in archive form, give us roughly 24 hours or so to get the files converted and post them to the archive. Thank you.